The rain poured heavily over the small village road. Amir, a poor mechanic, crouched beside a broken truck, his hands numb from the cold and his clothes drenched. Life had never been easy for him. Each day was a struggle to earn enough to feed his young daughter, Alina. But despite the hardships, he never complained, because she was his world. One morning, Amir's wealthy in-laws invited Alina to spend time with them in the city. They never truly accepted Amir, mocking his poverty and humble work. That day, they insisted on taking Alina to the train station, promising it would be a fun family trip. Amir, hesitant but hopeful, agreed. At the station, laughter echoed as travelers rushed past. But in a cruel twist, Amir's in-laws left little Alina standing alone on the platform. "Let's see how she finds her way home," they whispered to each other with smirks. To them, it was just a joke, proof of how little they respected the girl's struggling father. Alina waited, clutching her small backpack, her eyes filled with fear as trains came and went. Hours passed before a kind stranger noticed her crying. With compassion, he led her back toward her village, determined to find her father. When Amir saw his daughter arrive, soaking wet and trembling, something inside him broke. He hugged her tightly, realizing the cruelty she had suffered. Tears mixed with rain on his face as he whispered, "You will never be alone again." Word of what happened spread quickly. The villagers, who once pitied Amir, now stood by him, condemning the in-laws' heartless act. Even the authorities got involved, questioning the wealthy family's neglect. Amir, once overlooked and mocked, found strength in his love for Alina. He worked harder, built a small repair shop, and gave her a life where she would never have to depend on those who abandoned her. Years later, Alina, grown and successful, often looked back at that day. What her grandparents called a joke had instead become the moment that bound her and her father together forever. Because love, unlike cruelty, never leaves you stranded. The mechanic finally reached home, drenched from the storm. His small, broken house was dimly lit by a flickering lantern. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, water dripping from his clothes onto the cracked floor. At the wooden table sat his wife, tears rolling down her face. She had heard what happened at the station, how their little daughter was left behind like a lost child. Her heart was shattered. The old mother sat nearby, hands trembling, unable to process the cruelty of her son-in-law's wealthy relatives. She stared blankly at the wall, caught between disbelief and fear. Then came the loud, angry voice of the wife's brother, his words sharp, filled with accusations. He shouted about shame, about poverty, about how Amir had failed to protect his child. His hand raised mid-air, as if violence might follow his rage. The wife's eyes widened as tears streamed down her cheeks. Before she could respond, a glass slipped from the table, shattering across the floor. The sharp crack startled everyone. The grandmother rushed to scoop up the child, holding her tightly as if shielding her from the chaos. The little girl buried her face in her grandmother's arms, frightened by the shouting and the breaking glass. Meanwhile, Amir stormed outside. He lit a cheap cigarette with trembling hands, smoke curling into the night air. Alone under the stars, his face hardened. He felt the weight of poverty, humiliation, and betrayal crushing him. Inside, secrets were being whispered. Outside, a father battled his demons. And above all, the fragile thread of family hung by a single moment of truth. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, thick with whispers and tension. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious onlookers, villagers, and relatives who had come to witness the trial. At the front, the judge sat high on the bench, his stern eyes sweeping across the room. Papers shuffled in his hands as he called for order. On one side, Amir's wife sat beside her lawyer. Her face was streaked with tears, trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. Every word spoken in the courtroom felt like another wound in her heart. The husband, the man who had mocked Amir and left the child stranded, sat nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His once proud demeanor was gone, replaced by the jittery movements of someone cornered by truth. In the back row, Amir sat quietly, his mechanic's clothes out of place in the grand hall. He said nothing, his rough hands folded together, eyes heavy but resolute. He was a man who had carried burdens too long, and now he placed his trust in justice. At the witness stand stood the well-dressed stranger. His calm voice carried across the room as he gave his testimony. He told the court exactly what he saw that day at the train station, how the wealthy family had abandoned the little girl on purpose, calling it a joke. Gasps rippled through the room. The truth, once hidden in shadows and whispers, now echoed loudly in the chamber of justice. The judge leaned forward, his gavel resting firmly in hand. The decision was drawing near, and with it, the fate of everyone in that courtroom. The city was alive with neon lights, glowing signs flickered in red, blue, and green, painting the wet pavement with shifting colors. Cars rushed past, horns echoing, but in one corner of the street, a confrontation was unfolding that silenced everything else. The wife stood tall beneath the glowing lights, her tears replaced with fiery resolve. For too long she had been silent, but tonight she was unafraid. Her husband, the man who once sneered with pride, stared at her in shock. He had never seen her this strong, this defiant. Beside her, the stranger held a leather folder tightly against his chest. Inside were the secret documents, proof of corruption, betrayal, and the cruel plan that had nearly destroyed their family. His face was calm, but his presence carried the weight of undeniable truth. From the shadows across the street, Amir watched quietly. His mechanic's jacket blended with the darkness, his cigarette ember glowing faintly before disappearing. His eyes, weary but unyielding, never left his wife and child's future. The husband's face turned pale, his confidence drained by fear. His lips trembled, searching for words, but no excuse could hide the truth now. Neon light glared against his skin, exposing him fully. The wife's voice cut through the night, steady and unshaken. "Your lies end here. You will not ruin our lives anymore." And in that moment, the city's chaos seemed to pause, as if the neon-lit streets themselves bore witness to justice beginning to unfold. The courtroom was silent, every breath held as the final words of testimony echoed through the chamber. The stranger stepped forward one last time, placing the sealed documents on the judge's desk. The rustle of papers seemed louder than the murmurs of the crowd. The judge read carefully, his stern eyes narrowing. Then, with a sharp crack, he raised his gavel high and slammed it down. "Guilty," his voice thundered, shaking the room. Gasps erupted from the benches. The wealthy husband's face drained of color, his mouth opening in disbelief. He stumbled backward as the guards stepped in, their hands gripping his arms firmly. The man who once mocked, humiliated, and abandoned a child now stood powerless, dragged away in disgrace. At the front, the mechanic's wife broke into tears, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of victory, of release from years of cruelty and fear. She stood tall, shoulders trembling but proud, her eyes locked on her daughter who had endured so much. The stranger bowed slightly toward the family. His work was done, the truth had spoken louder than wealth or pride. In the back, Amir, the poor mechanic, finally allowed himself to breathe. He rushed forward, scooping his daughter into his arms. Her tiny arms wrapped around his neck, her soft voice whispering, "Papa." He held her tightly, eyes wet with relief. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. No amount of money, no court, no cruel in-laws could ever take her away from him again. And as the guilty husband was taken away, the family remained, scarred but stronger, bound together not by wealth, but by love, truth, and endurance.